Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Great to have you with us again on this program, both live and if you're getting the show afterwards, that's great too. You're here with the Haircut Twins. For those of you who are joining us live, John Sheeran and I got the ears lowered, as they say. John, how are you, sir? Did you enjoy the bye week?
Yeah, I did. Very very relaxing, very long, but that with what has gone on the past couple weeks, I've kind of accepted that as well. So yeah.
Yep. And yet again another special Thursday edition. We appreciate the listeners and the fans sticking with us. I know the schedule's been a little wacky coming up here, and things come up. We're busy guys, but we still want to bring you the program. And we do know that Thursday night is this Thursday night's game is a big one because Carolina is playing Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, and if we're on Thursday night, like I said. So if you're listening to the show later on, you already know what the result is. But for now, the Panthers just took an early 7-0 lead on the Steelers, which is good news for the Bengals.
But the smart people are watching the game while muting Joe Buck and listening to us.
There you go. I mean, our voices have to be much, much more soothing than that of Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. You got the big time guys right here on the Orange and Black Insider. Kind of a lot to cover here, John. Unfortunately, it seems like it's more of the frustration type of things that we're going to talk about tonight. And I guess where we can start is the Bengals' inactivity in terms of bringing in potential people that can help the roster in the wake of injuries, in the wake of issues. Most Bengals fans by now know that AJ Green's hurt. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But backtracking a little bit, the New Orleans Saints, the team that is coming to town this week, realized they lost Ted Ginn for the year. By the way, that's crazy that he's still playing football. Seems like he's been playing forever. But they lost Ted Ginn. They're kind of struggling finding another guy that's consistent opposite of Michael Thomas, and they go and sign Dez Bryant, a guy that a lot of Bengals fans wanted to see in stripes because AJ Green is out, but also guys behind Green and Tyler Boyd have not played very well. Then you have the Atlanta Falcons, also another NFC South team. They go and bring in Bruce Irvin as kind of a last-ditch effort to try and make a playoff push. They're kind of middle of the pack right now. So I bring this up. This isn't an NFC South podcast, obviously, but I think these two moves make a lot of sense for their clubs. They would have made a lot of sense for the Bengals. Are you frustrated? Especially now, we might even see Dez Bryant this week with New Orleans coming to town.
Yeah, it's just funny how the Bengals had AJ Green obviously injured, and they had lost Carl Austin for the year. So the two biggest needs that they had in their bye week was wide receiver, pass rusher. When you know that the most talented guys on the free agent market are wide receiver, edge rusher. And I guess most logical Bengals fans kind of knew that both players weren't the kind of guys that the Bengals like to bring in, especially during the middle of the season. It's so rare that the Bengals would ever bring in an impact player in free agency, off the waiver wire, or even in the trade deadline. I think the last big one was Eric Winston back in the 2014 season, and he obviously helped, but it's just not something that happens very often. So it's very poetic that obviously the big name still in the market ends up signing with the team that the Bengals played the week after, which is just almost incredulous. And the fact that not only Ted Ginn was hurt, but Cameron Meredith, another Saints receiver, also needs to have surgery, will be placed on IR. So outside of Michael Thomas, all that leaves on the receiver depth chart is just Traquan Smith, who's a rookie out of Central Florida, who's a very talented rookie. And then there's Dez Bryant. So we don't know how much Dez will play against the Bengals on Sunday, but he's pretty much already slotted into that third receiver role and could potentially play some significant snaps late in the game, probably on a limited basis. But I guess our own Matt Minich, who is a great writer and film analyst on Cincy Jungle, he brought up the question: are Bengals fans more frustrated that they didn't sign Des Bryant or that they might not activate Auden Tate. And most of the majority results from the poll said that if Auden Tate isn't active. And I think that spoke to a lot of the resignation that Bengals fans have about bringing in impact free agents and just the unlikeliness of that kind of happening, that they would be more upset if Auden Tate didn't play after being promoted up to the active roster than the fact that they didn't sign Des Bryant, because signing Des Bryant is not something that I think a lot of people expected. It's what a lot of people like hoped on blind faith, but it's not something that we expected, even if we wanted them to. And it's just it might very well bite him in the butt if Bryant ends up making impact plays against them on Sunday.
Yeah, it's. By the way, quick score update on the Thursday Night Football game. Carolina was up 7-0, and I think first or second play that the Steelers had on offense on the ensuing kickoff, they throw a big touchdown to Juju Smith-Schuster to tie it up. So 7-7. I think that what you said made a lot of sense, and quite honestly, there's actually a part of me that almost wants Des Bryant to play and do very well against the Bengals.
For sure.
Because it's so frustrating. There are so many times that we see now. Let's back up a second. There are almost any time a big name guy, a former big pick, gets cut, whatever, Bengals fans are always like, "Oh, we got to get this guy. We got to get this guy." Obviously, there's scheme fit to think about. There's cost. There's locker room issues. There's all kinds of things to bring into the equation. I get it, but the Bengals have lost a number of players to injury. And for short-term, long-term, they lost a talented pass rusher in Carl Lawson. The sack numbers don't necessarily show it this year, but he has a lot of pressures, and obviously had a good rookie season. That's a guy you're going to miss.
Right.
Relying on Jordan Willis, a guy that I still think has a lot of promise, but has one sack in his NFL career in regular season games. He's a preseason beast, but when it comes to the regular season, he can't do very much. You have Sam Hubbard, who's had some very big plays, and then he's disappeared for stretches. So, you got Irvin floating out there where it's like, well, maybe pay a couple million to get this guy in there for a half a season, a rental deal. Now, he might have been a little bit different because it sounded like he really wanted to go and play in Atlanta and play for his old coach and Dan Quinn. So maybe that was, that played into it. But the point is, and you touched on it, John, the point is look, you don't need to get every single free agent out there. You don't need to get every top tier free agent out there, but there are moves to be made. This team has salary cap room. You shed a couple of guys, George Loka and others, Brandon LaFell, others. Yeah, that helped you get those big contracts to Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap this offseason, but you still have room to do something, and you still have ways to improve this team. Eli Apple, another, I think, first-round pick, a cornerback. He was just dealt to the Saints, right? Wasn't he a New York Giant? He was just the same. These are guys that you can bring in, not really cost a ton, and help your team out. And, unfortunately, the Bengals just seem to – there are a lot of things that have changed in Marvin Lewis's tenure, but this sit-on-your-hands thing, this conservative nature tends – it tends to hurt the team. And it also, you also think you go back to, I always bring this argument up too, in terms of thinking from ownership perspective. And I want to get your thoughts on this too, John. You look at the crowd that was at the game against the Buccaneers. Now, granted, the Bengals Buccaneers matchup probably obviously isn't as big as a Ravens game or a Steelers game or, another big team coming into town. But at the time, the Buccaneers were in the playoff hunt. The Bengals, are still in the playoff hunt. I would be surprised to see that stadium was just a little bit over. If they had 2/3 capacity that day, I would be very surprised to know that. And I think that fans just kind of get like, you're not really showing us much in terms of aggressiveness to bring these guys in, to really want us to make us want to buy expensive tickets.
Yeah, and I think that what most of us feel is that we just want to see him try, because you could tell me that you could talk to Des Bryant and Bruce Irvin, and you could ask them to give you a list of preferable teams that they want to join, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Bengals weren't in the top 10, and that's fine. But I want to see them try to get him in the first place. It almost seems like unless they are for sure that a free agent it has significant interest in joining the team, they kind of just don't even attempt to bring him in the first place. And that's a level of laziness that a lot of fans may not tolerate, even for Bengals fans who are resigned to the fact that they're ultra conservative. And I think that attendance number was somewhere in the range of 46,000. That was just coming off of the disaster of Sunday night. And after that game against the Chiefs, they obviously didn't say anything impactful to say like, hey, we're going to make sure this is better and we're going to do stuff and we're going to bring guys in. So it was almost like, the same old story following a primetime defeat. So yeah, we just kind of want to see them try, because if they don't end up bringing Des Bryant and Bruce Irvin in, that's fine. They can maybe survive it without those guys and have other guys come back from injury. But the fact that they just don't try to do these things, they don't try to improve their team in other ways that they don't normally do, that's kind of what hurts the most. And that's kind of what impacts fans' thoughts in terms of just investment into what looks to be a shaky season at best.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, there's a fine line to walk, right? I mean, probably their mindset, I would think, is, look, we've put our eggs in the draft basket. We got to see if Jordan Willis has long-term viability. We got to see if Sam Hubbard has long-term viability. We got to see if John Ross has long-term viability. Josh Malone has long-term viability. I get it. And and there's been a lot of criticism both from myself, from other fans, from writers, that Marvin Lewis doesn't play the young guys all the time, or as much as he probably should, when other veterans that aren't necessarily pulling their weight, they get more playing time, and that frustrates fans. I get it. So you bring in a veteran, you go, okay, well now you just potentially stunted those guys' growth. But it's not really so much. You can find ways to still rotate these guys in. You can still find ways to get the football to some of these guys. And I just I think it really bothered me on offense, because you didn't do the wide receiver thing high this year. You lost Eifert. Croft has been gone for a long time. Green is out. Malone's been non-existent. Ross has been out. Core has been a mess. Erickson's Erickson, I guess. He's more of a special teamer than a wide receiver, in terms of contributions. So I think that's just where you go. You just get frustrated and you go, well, why can't you just do something that could help your team? Because you're still in the hunt. You're still right there.
Yeah, and I feel like they had a fear that if word got out that they were trying to acquire Des Bryant and then Des decided not to join him, which again could have been a likely possibility outcome. I'm afraid that they were afraid of maybe sending the wrong message to guys like Erickson and Malone and even now Auden Tate, that you're trying to bring in someone to play over them, because obviously they're better players, and none of those guys that they're now thrusting into the lineup for Green have shown anything to give us any confidence or hope. But if this team is truly in win now, then they have to realize that the young players that they're trying to develop just aren't there yet. And under the current circumstances, a guy like Des Bryant could provide a much more impactful offensive contribution for only, I think his salary is like $660,000 this year, and obviously none of it's guaranteed because we're at week 10 of the season. So I just want to see them try. If they fail, they fail, and you just move on to the next opportunity. But the fact that they sit on their hands too much and just rely on guys magically getting better by not doing anything different, it's tiresome, and it obviously leads to the same outcomes that we always see.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. There are hints of the team kind of operating scared.
Yeah.
They have a lot of the free agent splashes they made in the early middle parts of Marvin Lewis's tenure. Antoine Odom, Antonio Bryant. They still hang on to those fears of, what if we spend this money and this guy doesn't work out and it blows up in our face? Well, it happens. It's happened to every team, and you can't really operate a successful franchise, in my eyes, that way. And I think they still kind of, you hear Jeff Hobson kind of yearly almost regurgitate that kind of stuff, that's why that's why they're not active in March. That's why they're not so active at the trade deadline, all that kind of stuff. Another score update real quick on this Panthers-Steelers game. In 5 game minutes, there's been 3 touchdowns. Cam Newton threw a pick 6 to Vince Williams after Juju Smith-Schuster had a long touchdown. So it's now 14-7 Steelers as Carolina tries to regroup after getting that early 7-0 lead. So interesting game here. It's probably going to be a lot of both these offenses can score. So there's probably going to be a lot of that. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this show on YouTube. You can get it on iTunes. You can get it on the Google Play app, the Stitcher app. You can get it on Art19. You can get it on Cincy Jungle. So go get the program. We appreciate all the subscribers and all of the support. I got a great voicemail from a listener actually on I believe it was Friday morning last week. John, he couldn't call in during our normal time. I think his name was Robert. So thanks for the nice message, Robert. He had some kind words for us, and we appreciate that. Speaking of the phone line and text line, you can get in touch with us. We'll be taking calls later in the show, but you can always text us throughout the show. 949-542-6241. 949-542-6241. We will be taking calls and your questions, so you can call us. You can text us. Call us later in the show, but you can text us at any point. And you can leave your questions in the live YouTube chat or tweet at us at BengalsOBI. We'll look at that. And then we also have the live comment thread. If you're watching on cincyjungle.com and you want to leave a comment there, we'll keep an eye there. So please do that. Moving on, and speaking of the A.J. Green injury, John, there are a number of players that the Bengals need to step up in Green's absence. It looks as if Green, who knows exactly how long he'll be out. We've seen, unfortunately, Green has been a guy, he's been pretty durable throughout his career, but there have been a handful of seasons in his career where he misses the occasional 1-2 games. And it looks like that's probably going to be the case here with this injury. He usually rebounds well and plays well. It was a shame because Green and Boyd, as I mentioned last week, were on pace for 1,000-yard seasons and double-digit touchdowns. That may be in jeopardy now, depending on what happens with Green. But there's kind of a two-pronged question here, and we'll start with this. And it's okay if it's the same person, but we'll start with this one. Who needs to step up the most with Green's absence? Obviously against New Orleans and maybe even going ahead. It would be a shame if Green isn't available for Baltimore because he absolutely destroys the Ravens. But let's just kind of say, let's take it 1 week at a time here. But who needs to step up the most, whether it's a receiver or maybe a running back or what have you? Who needs to step up the most with Green out of the lineup?
Well, just real quick, I just want to confirm with all our listeners, we did call that Green would miss at least 1 or 2 games. And it would be the same, almost the exact same situation as Billy Price. So just Not to toot our own horns, but we did foresee this coming. A lot of you did too. Yeah. But who needs to step up? It has to be obviously John Ross, and the fact that he was practicing this week. I think Tyler Boyd said he was back to his normal self. He's blazing by guys in the secondary, which when I went to training camp for almost all the time, that was exactly the case. So obviously him being healthy helps them out a lot, and obviously the Saints defense is extremely vulnerable against the pass. They're like 26th in expected points on defense, but they're first in rush defense, which really tells you how bad their pass defense is. And I'm sure that Ross is going to get a lot of opportunities to torch Marshawn Lattimore, Eli Apple, Marcus Williams at safety. And they're going to need him to do that because, without Green, he's like their most competent vertical threat. And Ross is the guy, behind him who can bring that ability, but just hasn't been able to do that obviously yet. If he's healthy, he should make an impact. But the guy who will step up I think Ross is the guy who needs to step up because obviously the guy who probably will step up in his place, Tyler Boyd, he's going to do what he normally does out of the slot. And you can almost at this point count on the production from him, even if a little bit more load of the offense is bestowed upon him without Green. I think that he's basically the Bengals version of Mike Thomas. The majority of the targets that you put on him, he's going to make the most of them. He's going to be effective in it, regardless of if the attention is more swayed to this way, because at this point, he's stepped up to, as much as we could possibly ask for out of a guy in his third year who had an underwhelming second year. But Ross needs to make that eventual step. And with Green out of the lineup, this is his perfect opportunity to against a very bad pass defense.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we're sitting here saying the first segment we did on this show talking about Des Bryant, hopefully we're sitting here saying, oh, that doesn't even matter because Ross stepped up huge and he's playing well with Green out of the lineup. You know, that would be a dream scenario. And, you know, we've seen some good things from him this year. He's got the 2 touchdown catches. He's made a couple of plays, but the consistency is a major issue with Ross. And I think part of that has to do with injury. But yes, I think, as you mentioned, who needs to step up, I would agree with John Ross on that. But I'm going to go a little different. Who needs to step up? I will say who needs to step up is CJ Uzomah. And I say that because tight ends are always a security blanket. The Bengals have used their tight ends in screens and all kinds of different, you know, short passes. They had a long pass to Jordan Franks against the Buccaneers a couple weeks ago. So they're actually, for years and years and years, early in Marvin Lewis's tenure, we always talked about, where's the tight ends? They never used a tight end. You know, they had Reggie Kelly around for years, and he was the blocker guy. They had Gresham, but Gresham was feast or famine. And then, you know, lately they've used their trio, when they have them healthy, of tight ends pretty well. Uzomah has a lot of athleticism. I really like him. Unfortunately, he's kind of been battling injuries in his career as well. He's been down the pecking order. Now you got Eifert out. You probably have Croft out. Behind Uzomah is a lot of and Uzomah is also battling a collarbone injury that he suffered against Tampa Bay. So I think he needs to step up. You know, I think that if any quarterback, you know, they always talk about this with young quarterbacks, but any quarterback that has a capable tight end that they can rely on in an offense always makes things more comfortable. So I will say, yes, I agree with Ross, but I will say that the person who needs to step up in AJ Green's absence the most would be CJ Uzomah, just to kind of help take pressure off of some of the other guys, Boyd, Ross, whoever, and also make Andy Dalton a little more comfortable. I think you tipped your hat a little bit with who will step up. You said Tyler Boyd, you think will do that.
Yeah, and along with Boyd, just to kind of diversify the answer a little bit, I'm going to go, hopefully he plays Giovanni Bernard. And if he does play, I think he's going to have, I'll predict that he has some snaps in the slot. I don't know what his workload's going to be like if he plays at all, because when we're recording this, he's been limited on Wednesday and Thursday in practices. So if he does play, on the assumption that he does play, I think that we're going to see probably maybe more targets than actual rush attempts. I think they're going to lean on Joe Mixon in the running game, but I think Bernard's going to get some usage as a running back, and not to obviously the extent that Alvin Kamara is for the Saints, but I think that for them to win against, you know, a Saints defense that's pretty strong in the front seven, they're going to have to get creative with the way that they use Bernard, and that's something that they haven't been able to do with him or Mixon this year under Bill Lazor. Snaps in the slot, you know, more than just screen passes and just short passes out of the flat. I think that would help the Bengals offense a lot, and if Bernard is healthy, I think he's a weapon that will definitely help Dalton out in terms of just keeping the offense moving without his best player on the field. So obviously Boyd is, you know, his safety blanket, his third down machine, but I think with Bernard back, you'll see kind of an increase in just the flow of the offense through the passing game with Green out.
I totally agree. And when you look at, unfortunately, I think it was his last game he's played, the last game he played this year against Atlanta. You know, a lot of people are like, well, Green had the big touchdown catch to win the game. Ross had the long touchdown catch. Boyd was absolutely critical on that last drive, extending plays and moving the chains all over the place. Yes, of course. But when you look at the outlets, the outlet that Giovanni Bernard provided without Joe Mixon in the lineup, what he was able to do, I don't think you can say enough in terms of his value to this offense. You know, they're going to need to get unfortunately, some of the plays to Giovanni Bernard that are drawn up are very predictable. The swing passes. I mean, there are times where immediately after the ball is snapped, I literally say out loud, I'm like, swing pass. Because you just see it coming. Sometimes it still works very effectively. Other times they swarm it. But it's stuff like that where I'm going to agree with you. I don't want to take the lazy route, but I agree with you. That was the guy I was going to say is that's who will step up. And the one facet I always talk about when I talk about Giovanni Bernard, which is very, very underrated and very, very overlooked, is his ability to pass protect. For a smaller guy, unfortunately, you think of Giovanni Bernard as this guy, passing situations, he's going to go out for a pass, or third down, he's a third down back, he's going to go out for a pass. Well, a lot of times, if you watch the film, a lot of times, especially when the Bengals are giving up a lot of pressure on Andy Dalton, he stays back there and helps chip blockers, take on blockers, blitzers, and does pretty well at that. So I think that's an underrated aspect of his game. I think that both guys need to be out on the field at the same time in terms of Mixon and Bernard. Maybe Bernard's out there split wide in the slot, like you said, as an actual receiver, and Mixon's out in the backfield. But I think that if you have both of those guys out there on the field at the same time, that's going to be a very big matchup nightmare for opposing defensive coordinators, because it's kind of a pick your poison. And I think that is a good remedy to use with Green out of the lineup. Bernard's not going to go for the long bombs, but the yards after the catch, quick pass, get him open, get the first down type of thing, that could be pretty easy to come by. So I'm going to agree with you on Bernard is the guy that will step up. And as you said, he's still slowly coming back. I think he'll probably play this weekend, but we will see. Another score update on the Steelers-Panthers game. The Steelers just scored again. I don't even think it's out of the first quarter yet. The Steelers just scored again, 21-7 on the James Conner touchdown. So not good news there. It started off very promising, and not great news for the Bengals there, but they need to take care of business this week coming up against the Saints. We're going to take some texts. We will be taking texts throughout the show. We're going to take some calls later on. If you want to call us in, 949-542-6241 is the number. You can also leave your questions in the live YouTube chat. You can tweet at us at BengalsOBI or in the comment section at Cincy Jungle. And you can also get this show if you are unable to join us live on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Art19, CincyJungle.com, and on YouTube. So thanks for listening, however you may be listening. Big game coming up here, John. And unfortunately, I think the common perception is that the Bengals are set to get blown out by New Orleans. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Cincinnati's defense being one, going up against New Orleans offense being two. New Orleans coming out and beating who pretty much everybody thought was the best team in the league in the Rams last week. So I'm starting this one off on a rosy note, aren't I? What can the Bengals? Because I think the big matchup is the Bengals defense that gets the occasional big play but struggles in the basics, tackling, coverage, letting up big plays, getting off the field on third downs. What's going to be the key, and who are going to be the key players on defense against this explosive New Orleans offense?
Yeah, it's scary because all week I've seen a lot of analytics and stats breaking down what's possibly the best quarterback season we've seen from this year in Drew Brees. And it's scary because when he gets rid of the ball before 2.5 seconds, he's got a pass rating well above 100. When he's holding on to the ball for more than 2.5 seconds, he's got a pass rating well above 200. And then you look at what's around him, and it's Alvin Kamara, perhaps the best dual threat back in the NFL. Mike Thomas, the most efficient receiver in the NFL. His offensive line doesn't really have a weakness in it. It's an offense without virtually any holes. And the only thing that could potentially slow them down is that they're playing they're going to be playing in less than 50-degree weather along the Ohio River. And I think the defense can take advantage of that, but also, obviously, we've talked about when they play Kansas City in that weather, tackling's hard. And as we saw them trying to tackle Kareem Hunt many times, they failed, obviously. But on the defensive side of the ball for the Bengals, I think that they have to really swarm Kamara when he's releasing from the line of scrimmage, because he loves to run Texas routes, which is basically out and in. He loves to run option routes out of the backfield and really take advantage of which leverage the linebacker is playing him. So obviously, guys like Preston Brown and Jordan Evans, they have to be more aggressive than they have been in the past to get their hands on Kamara before he reaches 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. Because if Kamara gets space, Breeze is going to be dumping balls up to him all day. He might end up with more than 10 catches and more than 100 yards receiving unless they snuff that out extremely quick. So linebackers have to play monumentally better than they have, and it's scary when they still don't have their best one in Nick Vigil out of the field. And in the secondary, William Jackson is going to be going up against Mike Thomas, and that's going to be a great matchup of two 2016 first and second round picks. Obviously very accomplished and early in their careers, but Thomas gets separation in such a physical manner. He's a physical specimen at 6'3", like 215 pounds, and he's basically the Marquise Colston 2.0 in that Saints offense. And Breeze has such a tremendous chemistry with him, targeting him over the middle. Thomas's catch radius is out of this world, but William Jackson's ball skills are also extremely impressive. And if Jackson can, again, match the tenacity downfield in his routes and not let him out-physical him downfield, he has a chance to at least slow down Thomas. Because at this point, Thomas is going to get his 5 to 6 catches, maybe 70, 80 yards. He's basically, in terms of production, he's like their AJ Green, right? He's going to get his, and that's something that just can't really be stopped. So Jackson is going to have to play a much better, more physical game, and obviously Drake Kirkpatrick as well. So I just think that those two weapons are the ones that they really have to key in on and not let them win early in the ways that they normally win.
I agree. I totally agree with all of that. I'm gonna get a little crazy and probably go a little old school on you on this one. I almost think that the Bengals offense, in a way, is gonna play a part in their defense. And what I mean by that is, if they can control the football, if they can sustain drives, if they can run the football with Joe Mixon, potentially Giovanni Bernard, and keep that offense off of the field, obviously it gives them a chance. I think if you do that combined with the weather, Drew Brees is fantastic. He's one of the best quarterbacks of all time, as you mentioned. But he plays far better in a dome and at home than he does in winds and cold and all that stuff, and as do almost every quarterback. So I think that's, as weird as it may sound, there's these, as you mentioned, critical defensive matchups. But I think if the Bengals can hang on to the ball and sustain drives and run the football effectively, keeping them off the field, keeping their own defense off of the field, I think is key. Because if you looked at what the Bengals, go back to the Tampa Bay game, Cincinnati at one point had a 21-point lead against Tampa Bay. I think that was what they took into the locker room at halftime, if I'm not mistaken. And then they come out and they have 4 straight 3-and-outs on offense. The defense had kind of held or gave up a field goal here and there and all that. They had the pick 6, all that kind of stuff. And the offense just could not even sustain a drive. And I'm not talking sustain a drive and punt away after a while or whatever. I mean, 3-and-out, defense is back on the field. 3-and-out, defense is back on the field. I mean, they get tired. They get tired. And I think that if this offense does that, and it's going to be a challenge this week without Green. I think if this offense does that again this week, this could be a really long day. And it's not just because the offense isn't putting up points, yards, all that kind of stuff. It's because they're putting their defense back out there so quickly that New Orleans could take advantage, right?
And there's no doubt that if Cincinnati turns the ball over, like I have zero confidence in the defense's ability to match them in terms of turnovers. If they lose the turnover battle, it's basically a done deal. Drew Brees has like 1 interception on the year. I think they've had a few fumbles, but not all of them have been lost. The offense, for as good as it is, they're not involved in terms of turnovers. They don't make mistakes on the offensive side of the ball. And as we've talked about so much this year, the defense is so turnover heavy and turnover reliant that it's just not going to be the case for this game. They're going to give up a lot of yards. They're going to give up a lot of points in the process. And you probably can't count on them, intercepting Drew Brees a couple times. This isn't playing Jameis Winston. So if that offense not only doesn't sustain drives, but gives the ball back to an opportunistic Saints defense, it's basically a done deal at that point. So I agree with a lot of what you said. It's going to be more of I guess from the offensive standpoint, it's going to be a lot of feeding Joe Mixon to make sure that they're not putting the ball in harm's way, and especially if the defense shows signs of giving leeway to the Saints offense, which will happen. So yeah, I definitely agree that they got to win. They got to at least keep the time of possession close, and if they lose the turnover battle, they can't expect their defense to pick up that slack.
Yeah, this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We'll be taking phone calls in just a few minutes. If you want to call in, 949-542-6241. We're also taking texts. We'll try and get to some listener questions here in just a few minutes. But continuing on with our discussion about the Saints, I look at this game, and like many cynical fans, I sit here and I go, well, this is probably not going to – I don't know if it'll be to the extent of the Chiefs debacle, but this is a game that does not play into the Bengals' favor. But we mentioned the weather, and there's the possibility that the Saints could have been emotionally and physically somewhat exhausted after the victory against the Rams, and just say, you know what, like, well, they don't. They just show up, and it's there's a lot of things going against them. They're on the road, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. And then that makes things maybe potentially a little closer. Maybe the Bengals can sneak out a win. I've been kind of mulling both sides here. Am I crazy to even think the Bengals have a chance in this one, or especially with Green out, or is there what kind of glimmers of hope do you think that you or I can provide our listeners this week?
So just to start, I don't expect a win. All right, I'm just going to throw that out there, but for reasons as why it could happen. I'll take this back to 2014. The Bengals lost 30-0 or whatever the hell the score was against the Browns on Thursday night. And then 10 days later, they go on to play the Saints in the Superdome. No confidence in that game at all. I remember specifically, they're going to get beat by multiple scores. They end up winning like by 2 touchdowns, scoring 30 points. Jermaine Gresham had that one thing with the fan, and it surprised a lot of us. So I don't know if there's a parallel in that, but regardless of the other factors, I believe that right now that the Bengals are 6-point dogs at home, and they do pretty well when they're home underdogs again, unless it's against the Steelers. So they have that thing going. They're also wearing orange and black, orange jerseys, black pants. They're like 6-0 in that combination as well. There are some factors, logical or not, that we can point to provide some hope. So it's just that, like, going into the Kansas City game, I knew that was going to be a loss. Like, went into it watching it as a loss because it was on primetime, because it was against Mahomes, everything going like that. This one, I do kind of agree. Like, I still expect a loss, but I don't think it's going to be to that extent, because 1 o'clock kickoff, the weather probably plays into their favor a little bit more. Just those factors, that kind of give us a little bit of hope. I think that's fair and reasonable. And if you're watching this game, like a true fan and expecting to win, maybe your hopes won't immediately get, demolished after the opening kickoff and after the first series because of those things. And plus, it's already November. They're not playing with a division lead anymore. There has to be a little bit more desperation, and they have to at least change at least something to what they do on offense without their best player out there. So I do think that there are some, instances of reason and logic as to why this game could be closer than what we may fear it won't be.
So with that being said, you mentioned the Chiefs game and that being a debacle. You mentioned, some of the other better teams in this league. Carolina, they lost to Carolina. They lost to Pittsburgh. You kind of, Miami's in the hunt, but I wouldn't say Miami's necessarily an elite team or a great team at this point in time. So basically, the perception of the Bengals and the perception of the Bengals under Marvin Lewis, both within the fan base and nationally, is the same. They'll be competitive. They'll win the games they're supposed to win, and they might make the playoffs, so they'll be in the hunt towards the end, probably, right? And then they'll probably lose in the first round because they've proven that they can't, right? I mean, we're laughing, but I mean, it's kind of the case, right?
Funny things in life are true.
Yeah, I mean, those 3 games I mentioned, that kind of points to it once again this year. But if the Bengals were to beat this Saints team this week, would and should perceptions change about what this team is capable of doing in 2018?
A lot of things would have to happen for that to happen, because on paper this is obviously a good matchup for the Saints and a game that they should win. And I guess every NFL team has those games where you don't expect to win and they kind of come and just come out on top, and that's kind of the nature of any given Sunday and that kind of thing. But they're gonna have to prove that they overcame certain scenarios that in the past they normally wouldn't, and they have the 1 o'clock kickoff on their side, and they have all those other factors that we already mentioned on their side. But just a win, probably not, because the sample size is just one game, and we have a ton of other history to look back on, especially just from this season. But then again, winning without AJ Green against the number one offense, against arguably the best team in the league, it's no small matter, and it's nothing that you can just brush to the side. So I would still say no. I wouldn't have any or significantly more confidence if they were to end up playing in January, but I would still have to see what transpired in order for them to get that win. If some incredible luck somehow happened for them, that's amazing, but obviously luck isn't transferable in the long run. And again, like it's crazy things would probably have to happen, and unless they completely show out against a much more talented team, a much more healthier team, and look like a team that we've never seen before under Marvin Lewis, then yeah, the meter might not shift for me as much as it may for other people, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this would be one of Marvin Lewis's signature wins if he was to beat this team, just because this is a very good team, and they're essentially, a lot of people are saying they are now the best team in the league because they beat the Rams, who many people believe is the best team in the league. So basically, your top three teams at this point seem to be the Chiefs, the Saints, and the Rams. And you can put those in any order. The Patriots are probably sniffing there as well. But those are kind of your top teams. And I think if Cincinnati can beat this team, that would say a lot. It would inspire more confidence based on what they can do. But we'll see. I saw a comment in the YouTube chat from Minor Threat. I don't know if that's an homage to the old school punk band Minor Threat, but I'm a huge Bengals fan, but I just don't see a win here, guys. Yes, you're crazy. I'm thinking he's saying me to think that they have a chance. Bengals lose 38-10. It's either Jeff and I or Jeff Andy says Bengals just don't have the defense to hang with the Saints. Your score prediction this week, John, on this game.
I didn't look at the over-under. I'm assuming it's somewhere in the mid to high 50s, even with the weather. But I'll go with Saints like 28 or 31. Yeah, Saints 31, Bengals 24. I'm going to say they call it garbage time, if you will. They kind of make a somewhat surge late in the game with the Saints defense being tired and cold as they are. But it's just hard for me to think that without Green that they're going to be able to match up whatever offensive output that the Saints offense can do and will put out, because this is a matchup of two of the worst defenses in the league. But as we saw against the Chiefs, that doesn't really matter if one coaching staff completely outcoaches the other. And Sean Payton is not exactly regarded as one of the better head coaches, but at least in this case, he's the Saints have that advantage. And even if they're on the road, they're still the better team, and I still think they come out with at least a one-score victory.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. Maybe the Bengals make it competitive in some respects, but I just think that there is too much, and I mean that in a couple of different, too much to deal with, and I mean that in a couple different ways. I mean that in too much to deal with on the Saints offense, too many injuries to deal with. Even though they're getting guys back, there are still major injuries that they're dealing with. We don't think Vontaze Burfict is going to play. He hasn't practiced this week so far. So, there's just a lot to deal with. And unfortunately, I just don't think that I see a Bengals win. I guess I will go, since you took my 31 score. I will say I'll say 33-21 Saints. I think it'll be a somewhat close, but not really type of game. And, hopefully the Bengals can get healthy and if they do lose this game, it hurts. But especially with now the Steelers being up 24-7 on the Panthers, it hurts in their divisional race. But it doesn't. It's not a conference game. It's not a divisional game, and they have the Ravens next week, which is a big game. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, and hopefully the Bengals can surprise us all with a win there. But those are our predictions. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get this show on iTunes, YouTube, Google Play, Stitcher, Art19, and CincyJungle.com. So please do so. And we appreciate your support. I see Jeff. It's either Jeff Andy or Jeff and I. I don't know. I can't tell. But in the live YouTube chat, he predicted 34-17 Saints. We're going to get to some listener questions and get out of here, folks. We're cruising through this show tonight, which is usually we go a little long, but we might finish up a little early. If you want to give us a call, we've already got a couple of questions teed up here. If you want to give us a call or text 949-542-6241, this is the time to do it. And we will try and get your questions on the air. But for now, we've got a couple in the live YouTube chat that I wanted to get to, John. One is from Sean Blankenship. It says, would you activate Auden Tate if only for red zone targets? Now, just a little background, the Bengals recently activated him to the roster this last week, especially in the wake of AJ Green's injury. So he is now on the 53-man roster, but we don't know if he will be activated or not this week. You mentioned, John, that Josh Malone was on the injury report on Thursday. So that's an interesting thing. But do you think that Auden Tate could be – we've talked about this a lot because his size, lack of speed, but good hands. Could he be that hybrid tight end wide receiver guy, a Devin Funchess, Kelvin Benjamin, one of these guys that can do some things in the red zone, and maybe that's where his niche is as an activated player?
I suppose I'll take it one step further, and for listeners of this show, they know that I wasn't too high on Auden Tate even in the preseason when he was making waves. But at this point, I mean, you just got to see who you have. And it's Cody Core, an intro Josh Malone, and Alex Erickson, who I appreciate as wide receiver, but I know he isn't much. If Auden Tate can't, win a couple routes against a guy like Eli Apple, who's struggled immensely over his career, I just don't see what the point is even having him on the team. You might as well just trot him out there for a couple snaps, at the X during midfield, and even more so in the red zone. If you're gonna have him, on the active roster without AJ Green, you're missing that true X in your offense. It might as well try out to see if it's Auden Tate in this specific scenario, because again, the Saints' pass defense is not good at all. And if I know Auden Tate's still not there yet as a prospect, but if he's truly as talented and as magnificent of a receiver as Florida State fans or even Bengals fans will have you say is, let him prove it. Because at this point, Cody Core sure isn't. Josh Malone is basically the offensive version of Jordan Willis. And again, Erickson's just Erickson. So you have literally nothing else to lose by playing him and just letting him make the mistakes, because it's better to let Auden Tate make those mistakes against the weak secondary than the guy that you've seen make those mistakes over and over. So yeah, I want to see him in the red zone. Heck, I want to see him during midfield to see if he can convert some third downs, because we've mentioned that the Bengals offense has struggled to keep flow, and without their best receiver, that's going to be more of a challenge. So yeah, let's see what Auden Tate can do against the weak secondary. I'm for it.
Yeah, and I don't think we're talking about an exorbitant amount of snaps. But I think there are plays that, hey, put him out there for the plays that you saw him succeed with in the preseason. Put him out there for the plays that you saw him dominate at practices and off-season work. But if he's out there, draw those plays up for him and get him involved. Ones that he can make, ones that he's comfortable with. Those are the things that you're going to need to do. If you're asking him to maybe do some different things, some things he's not used to doing, and if you're expecting the world from him because Green is out and you need to replicate that production somehow, that's not going to work. But red zone, short yardage, he's got a big body, big catching radius, so there's a little bit more margin for error on a throw, I guess, from Andy Dalton. So, I'm kind of with you. Why not? And that sounds funny to say, because usually you say that when a team is, out of the playoff race or something. It's towards the end of the season. You kind of go, well, we got to see what these young guys give us. But I mean, Green's out. You got to find something. You got to find something that works and that helps the offense. So, yes, and I do think that given his size, I think that he could be, as the question asked, he could be a good red zone target going forward here. Another question here we had. Let's see. Oh, okay. Vernon Lawson. This is an interesting one in the live YouTube chat. Basically saying, with AJ Green down, the outlook doesn't look good, all that kind of stuff. But he also said now that we have a half a season under the belt, and I think we've kind of been asked this before earlier in the year, but I think now that there's a half a season and now there's a lot of injuries and things where you can kind of say, well, this is where the Bengals need to do some stuff. He's talking about draft priorities next year. So positional draft priorities. You mentioned struggles at linebacker. The defense just is porous this year. That's coaching, also maybe talent at certain positions. There's a lot of tough decisions potentially for the Bengals to make too on both sides of the ball coming forward. Tyler Eifert, do you give him another shot, or do you say, dude, we already gave you the 1-year deal on a prove it thing. You still couldn't stay healthy, even though it was a freak thing. Maybe it's time to move on, and tight end is a high priority. What do you do about Vontaze Burfict, right? I mean, in the limited time what has he played? 2 games this year? Mm-hmm. And in those games, he didn't even play well. And he's been hurt or suspended this year. He's been proven to be relatively unreliable in certain facets. So where do you look? What do you prioritize in the next couple of, as the offseason approaches? We don't want to say that this season is over because it's not. The Bengals are right in the hunt. But there are warts on this team that are very noticeable.
Yeah, and I think it just boils down to 3 things. Just right side of the offensive line, still an issue, whatever you want to look at it. It could just be one position if they move Billy Price to right guard. But, yeah, right tackle is still a need, even if Bobby Hart's not been the total disaster that I kind of predicted. He's been okay, but they can definitely do better, and there's talented tackles coming up in the draft. Linebacker, not only just with Vontaze Burfict, but there's nobody else besides him when Nick Vigil's not on the field, and he's entering the last year of his contract for 2019. And then, for tight end, they need that vertical threat there because, as much as I liked Uzomah and as much as you like Uzomah, he still hasn't proven to be that consistent guy there. And there's and you look at the defense, and the defensive line's pretty solid with Lawson healthy. With that, we'll see how much that second pass rusher is still needed behind Lawson. And the secondary, I think I'm, for the most part, comfortable for where it is now because Drake Patrick has his ups and downs, and Darius Phillips has shown some promise at slot corner. If they move on with Dark Wes Denard, obviously another receiver would help with depth because the guys that are developing there still haven't really shown anything. And then backup quarterback as well, but that's not, if they want to keep Dalton for another 2 years, it's not something they need to invest with more than like a 3rd round pick. So top 3 needs probably still right tackle, linebacker, and tight end because of just so much uncertainty and such ineffectiveness to what is there right now.
This is going to probably come out the wrong way, but when I saw Alex Redmond's missing of practices earlier in the week, I got a little, I don't want to say excited because I don't want the guy to be hurt or anything like that, but I wish it would at least force the coaches to maybe think about the Hopkins Price both starting thing and give it a shot. And hey, we could be idiots and it doesn't work. But I think it's worth a look because Hopkins played well at a secondary position coming in for Price. Price was a guard in college also, and then he transitioned to center. So, I mean, it just kind of makes sense, but the Bengals are pretty set in their ways on that front. At any rate, hard to disagree with what you're saying. I just, like I said, there's some tough decisions to make, and I mentioned a couple already. You also may need to face a couple of tough decisions at edge rusher. I mean, Lawson will now be coming off an ACL tear, and he's had an ACL tear in both knees now. That's not good. Michael Johnson's getting up there in age. That, yeah, you drafted 2 defensive ends the past 2 seasons with 3rd-round picks, but again, we talked about Willis earlier. We don't know what's going on there. And then wide receiver too. Yeah, you've invested high picks on 3 guys, borderline 4 if you want to count Malone, but there's just not much happening behind Green and Boyd at this point. So, there's just some tough decisions that the Bengals need to face going forward. You mentioned the secondary and the cornerbacks. It's a shame that William Jackson, Dre Kirkpatrick, and Darqueze Dennard, for varying reasons, have combined for goose egg interceptions this year. That is not good. And that needs to change if the Bengals defense is to make any kind of a turnaround. So, that's it's hard to disagree with you on direction for the draft there, but good question there from Vernon. Let's go with one more and we'll get out of here, John. And this is from AJM. AJM. I don't know if that's a tip of the cap to Mr. McCarron or not, but we'll go with it. We kind of talked about this last week. Basically, it's just another facet of what we talked about last week. But basically, he or she is asking, is the defense struggling due to Terrell Austin's system, or is it simple communication issues? Now, I teeter on this because I wrote a mailbag on this on Cincy Jungle, and it was based on some of these questions we've received. And I saw it as, Gunther and Zimmer, when they drafted guys or when they were here and the team drafted guys like Kirkpatrick in the 1st round, Dennard in the 1st round, Jackson in the 1st round. These are press man corners. These are guys that you want to put on an island, and these are guys that can get physical with receivers, jam them up, all that kind of stuff. They also have good, pretty good speed. They can play catch up if they get beat, that sort of thing. And so what those guys, Zimmer and Gunther, like to do, they like to kind of leave those guys on the islands a bit. Yeah, they use the safety to help out back there, but they would do a lot of island coverages with those guys, try and get pressure up front. Now, that's been all kinds of inconsistent this year, and to me, that points to Austin. I do see that this is where I get confused on Pro Football Focus's ratings, because they are all about Jesse Bates, and Jesse Bates has had a good season. He's done a lot of good things. He's created a lot of turnovers, but I see a lot of communication issues in the back end of this defense. And I think part of that has to do with Bates' inexperience. I think also Williams is learning to play with Bates. He played with Aloka for a long time. He also mixed in with Reggie Nelson for a long time, so he's learning to play with Bates. They're all learning Austin's system. But it seems to me that there's a very high amount of big passes, big touchdowns, and a lot of looking around at each other and where are you type of thing. Your thoughts? Yeah,
I think it's, like you said, a combination of both. Just when looking at just the linebackers, and this might just be transcends to more than just an Austin thing, but just in the recent history of just the Bengals defense, they don't ask their linebackers to do a lot, and they ended up getting very little production from them as a result. And Joe Goodberry has, observed this a lot on Twitter in terms of his film reviews and how little of depth that the linebackers play in coverage, and that allows the middle of the field behind them to be so vacant. And typically in the past they've had their safeties play, decently back because they just don't have the range. And as a result, the middle of the field is vacant, wide open, and so you have passes going over the middle, uncontested, and then on some place where they do drop their linebackers back, then just the short intermediate middle of the field's wide open for running backs and tight ends. So I think that's something that Austin has failed to evolve in the current landscape of the defense. But we also can't forget that they don't have talented linebackers really without Nick Vigil on the field. And if Nick Vigil is your best linebacker, that position group in itself is not very strong in the first place. So definitely a severe lack of personnel from that group. And then just in the defense, if linebacker is your least talented group, it's not the end of the world. But just for the fact of how little talent there is there, it's such a strong issue. And a guy like Zimmer was able to compensate without star players there because he was such a talented mind for getting his edge rushers and his quarterbacks to play at a high level. And it's something that Terrell Austin just hasn't been able to do with the guys that have needed to step up. So I definitely agree with you with the fact that Bates being a first-year player, as impressive as he has in a vacuum, if they're relying on him to consistently make the right reads and calls and coverages, there's going to be mistakes. And we've definitely seen, Jackson and Kirkpatrick, leave wide open guys in their zones because they thought they were passing off to someone else. We've seen double moves happen. We've seen a lot of miscommunication specifically from that Buccaneers game where big plays have happened. That's kind of why they let up that lead. So yeah, definitely a strong sense of a lack of communication from the back end there. But even with that said, we have to admire the season that Bates has had and maybe put more blame on Austin for really putting that load on Bates and not maybe on Williams to make those calls and to make those adjustments in coverage as we've seen them do. So I do think it's a little bit of both, but we can't all put it on Austin when we look at what the personnel he's been dealing with injuries and such.
Yeah, and Rel Phoenix in the live YouTube chat says it's tackling ! Yes, but that's just part of the problem,
right?
Getting off the field on third down, letting up third and long situations, second and long situations, that's a problem. And hey, it's easy to bash Austin, and yes, he is to blame, but there have been times. How many times has I mentioned earlier about the trio of Kirkpatrick, Denard, and Jackson not having an interception? How many times have we seen Jackson and Kirkpatrick this year get their hands on footballs that should have been intercepted and were not? Yeah. And those have changed the landscape of those games in which I think there was 3 or 4 games in a row where Kirkpatrick had a should-be interception, did not. Jackson, I could think of at least 2 that happened this year. I mean, you get your hands on half of those, that's a big deal. And then, like you said, the injuries pile up. Vigil, Denard, Lawson now, Perfect being out of the lineup for various reasons. I mean, that doesn't help anything. And the pass defense is dead last. Maybe the remedy, you talked about Darius Phillips. Maybe the remedy now is going more nickel and dime kind of base defense, get more defensive backs out there. There may be some mismatches in terms of tackling on that front, especially if it's against a big tight end or something. But, it may limit some of these big plays and get more of those guys out there. I don't know. But, again, we've talked about this on the show basically since the Bengals started this year. And that's the way they're winning and the concern of sustainability for this team to get to the postseason and through the postseason with basically a defense that's ranked near or at the bottom in a lot of major categories. It's very hard to do that, especially when, yes, Andy Dalton's playing very well, potentially some of the best football in his career, but when you don't have a Rodgers, a Breeze, a Brady that you can say, okay, well, the defense is faltering, but we've got a guy that can put up 35, 40 points a game, no problem. I don't know. And like I said earlier, John, the offense has also played a part into this issue because the Bengals for the first 2 quarters come out a lot of times real hot, and then they disappear in that third quarter and early parts of the fourth quarter, a lot of 3 and outs, and just getting the defense back out there when they need a rest. And it's not helping things either. So there's a couple of things at play there. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Thank you for joining us live, and thank you for downloading the program. You can get it on YouTube, on iTunes. You can get it on Art19, Google Play, Stitcher, and CincyJungle.com. Quick score alert. This game is absolutely crazy, this Steelers-Panthers game. I don't know if you're watching or keeping an eye on it, John.
I am. Sure. There goes Antonio Brown.
Yep. The Panthers scored to cut it to 24-14. And like what happened earlier, a few plays later on offense, the Steelers cut. They strike back, and they are now at 31-14, 31 points with still 3 minutes left to play in the first half. Crazy. That's crazy statistics. And if you have Christian McCaffrey or Antonio Brown or James Conner, you're probably a pretty happy guy in terms of fantasy football this week. Because
I think my roommate has both Brown and McCaffrey. So
hope you're not playing them.
No, I'm not.
Well, that's good. We're gonna get out of here. Thanks for all the questions, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks, like I said, for dealing with the scheduling going on this these past couple of weeks. John and I have been pretty busy with a lot of different things, and we appreciate you hanging with us. We should be coming back up on the next couple of weeks. We should be back on kind of our Wednesday night schedule. So just for the time being, hang tight, and we should. John and I will have to talk, but we should be having a program probably on that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, maybe earlier in the week, depending. John, you and I can talk about that, but we're still planning on having a show that week, or at least I am. So we can go from there, and hopefully next week we're talking about a huge win by the Bengals over the Saints. Any final thoughts, John, as we close up shop? We're in November. I can't believe it.
Yeah, my beard is growing by the second. I'm not shaving for no shave, but
okay. Is that a Movember thing, or what?
Very much of a Movember thing.
Okay.
But also because it's like 40 outside and I have to stay warm as much as possible, and there's no heat in my room. But again, I'm gonna be watching this game with the expectation to lose. But if you're like me, it doesn't make you a bad fan. It's just the Saints play great football, and I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to see how the Bengals can counter whatever they have to counter, and if the Bengals, if they're truly different, then they'll rise to the occasion without their best player, AJ Green, against the bad defense. And I just think that, this game will tell us a lot. And at least for me personally, watching with minimal expectations helps. But if that's not your thing, feel free to go crazy and have your heart beating out of your chest.
Yeah. I think that this, a lot of people are saying, oh, big blow up by the Saints. I don't know if I necessarily see that, even with Green out and all this stuff. I think the Bengals will probably keep it interesting. I think this will be an interesting game. I don't think it's going to be a Kansas City debacle type of game. I don't see that. The other thing I want to say, it's been a kind of crazy week, not even just outside of football, between the midterm elections and all of the emotions. If you're on Twitter, Twitter's a pretty bad place. It's been a pretty bad place this past week or so. A lot of spite and different things coming from both sides of the aisle and all of that. I don't want to get into politics, but a lot of people are very emotional about politics in this current landscape, and that's okay. That's it's good to be interested in it, but try and be. For me out here in Southern California, there was, for those who haven't heard, there was another mass shooting out in Southern California on Thursday, actually near a university that I went to. I went to their campus about a month ago, so it just in general kind of struck home with me a little bit. Just when you think you want to make a rude comment to somebody online, or you want to just maybe just take a step back and think about other things, or relax a bit, because there are a lot of things going on in this world that aren't pretty right now. And if you're on social media, you probably see a lot of it, and a lot of people that are Twitter tough guys or social media tough guys. So I don't know, just try and be nice to each other for a little bit. This has been a rough week in a lot of different aspects, and keep your thoughts with the families that were affected in that shooting. It's a horrible deal, and it's becoming more and more frequent, unfortunately, and that needs to stop one way or the other. So I don't mean to bring the show down on a somber note, but let's try and be kind to one another for a little while here. There's enough hate going on in the world that's too much to bear sometimes, right, John?
Yeah, I'm glad. I was kind of saving that for you because of the locality of the issues. So it's about without traffic, of course, because anyone who's been to Southern California knows about the traffic. But from where I live, it's about an hour and a half or so. I mean, it's a little ways away, but it's still here. It's in Southern California, and to be honest, I was pretty shocked to hear about it. That's not really an area that's a very violent area, and former Marine and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty shocking. It's shocking to hear, but it's unfortunately not a shocking event now. It's almost normalized. And I think once we kind of realize that reality, we can take the appropriate steps forward. But the first step in solving a problem is recognizing that there is one.
Yep. And like I said, let's keep the families and friends and everybody affected in that. Just send them some good vibes, prayers, whatever your thing is. Do that, because those people are hurting for sure. It's not a pretty thing. But anyway, that being said, enjoy the game this week. Like I said, I hope that we are talking about a win, a Bengals win, and one of the signature wins in the Marvin Lewis era. It's a big game. And hey, if you're the Bengals, you're not expected to win. You're kind of playing at home, and you may just say, "Hey, let's just have some fun." Right? I mean, let's just go out there, have some fun. Let's not play tight. Let's just do what we can do, and who knows? Sometimes that leads to a win. Other times it could lead to a sloppy outcome, but We'll see. Thanks, John. Appreciate you joining me, and you've been a great addition to the show, my friend.
Peace out, man.
All right. Take it easy, everybody. We'll catch you next episode, and Who Day, I guess.